We need to respect someone else's opinion, so we need to try to accept and to be respectful of other people's opinions. But when we to say that we don't have intellectual, bright politicians, that will be a wrong assumption, because so one of the brightest politicians is sitting next to me on my left-hand side, and so if Andrei Alexandrovich is here, so then he will be he's sitting in exam, so he'll join us later, so you can begin. Yesterday, I'm sorry. Good morning. Good morning. I hope that everyone had a good night's sleep. And for me, school is my home, and many know about that. But so those who came here for the first time, so I can remind you that I was a graduate of the first. Of the first graduate 20 years ago, so 21 years ago, can imagine. And I graduated from the school, like Mr. Zakharov too, and so we were the graduates of the first year of the school's existence, and since that time it hasn't been a single year that I wouldn't participate and wouldn't speak at every year. So now it's impossible to exaggerate how much the school has given to me. Just broadened my horizon. So I learned new books and studied, very broadening. And I certainly it depends much on what I have been given by the school. It's a very important part of my life, and I hope it will be the same for you. And second had to do with what Mr. Voloshin was talking about yesterday. I agree with most of what he was saying, because it's based on common sense and logic and pragmatism. But certainly sometimes he was being sly in many comments. So when he was speaking that it's a pity that there is no opposition, so we wish we would grow it, because we want to do anything just to grow the opposition, but it won't grow for some reason. And certainly, but if for 15 years, so and every year, so you change the rules of elections, changing legislation, and so then to cancel one mandate election points, monopoly, censorship of the media, so using the soft methods of oppression or hard methods of oppression, playing softball, hardball, so defamation, libel, so home arrests, criminal investigations. It's very difficult against this background. It's quite difficult for the opposition to grow. But Alexander Stalevich so preferred not to mention that. Although, so there is another part of this story on the side, because the opposition, so Russian opposition, I mean the Russian opposition, maybe it's applicable to other countries as well. We are responsible too for being unable to grow faster and to come out with some alternatives. This is their fault as well, the opposition's fault. We can talk more about what's wrong with the position, why there are many differences between different components of the position, and so it's our fault as well. So what I liked about Mr. Voloshin, he said, so it's good to have a political competition. It's good to have opposition. It's great. It's wonderful to have a good democracy, and it's great just for the media to be independent and the freedom of speech. It would be great if the elections would be great. So if this is all good, so why have you been doing everything otherwise? Yeah, because when he was in power, he was doing everything exactly the opposite, so diametrically opposite. So we wish it would be this and this and this, but when he was and I remember what Chernomyrdin used to say. So we do not want to do it with Mr. President, and that's why we do it. Yeah, so this is probably the comment that I could describe with wide brush strokes. So because we don't want to do it with Mr. President, that's why we're doing it. Yeah. So then the Russian transit. So the Russia transitional period from A to B. So when he was saying that we're moving from the horrible totalitarian society towards a bright democratic future. But we've been working, we've been going this for 25 years, but we're moving away from this road actually. So we're moving in the opposite direction. But moving in the opposite direction, we declare that we're moving in the right direction to the bright and wonderful future of democracy. So yes, we restrict the freedom of speech. Yes, we manipulate and falsify the elections, but these are only temporary difficulties, and the temporary. So it will certainly go. So yesterday, temporary difficult. That's ad hoc. So it will go. So at this stage, so we need just to falsify a little bit, to control a bit, to oppress a little bit, but we have to do it. But this lasts for 25 years already, and then there is a question: what is sustainability? What is continuity? So if you say this is only temporary, then what it means to be forever? Yeah. And so what's the time frame of temporary and constant? And that is why. So June the 10th today. And who would have? Who would have thought that the 10th of June last year? So who would have had such a context of discussion in a year's time? So we couldn't have imagined that there would be Donetsk sanctions against Russia, Crimea a year ago. So if a year ago we had spoken about that, so there were agents a year ago, but there were no sanctions, and so the context, so the text, the texture, the canvas has changed so much that it's too early to come to any conclusions, because now the crisis is still in its exacerbated shape. So it's a acute crisis, still acute crisis, and so as we can't fathom so what's going to happen. So the different scenarios, very bad scenarios, can play out. Already bad scenarios playing out in Crimea and in Ukraine. So they're bombing, shelling, killing, shooting, and we don't know how it will play out in Ukraine. Sanctions again. So I don't know whether I spoke with Kudrin about the sanctions, but I get the impression that it's for a long period of time. It won't stop tomorrow. It's not a short-term, so bad spate between Russia and the West. Economy is in bad shape too. And so whether our big yellow brother will save us or not, that's a big question. And if they are ready to save, so on what conditions they are ready to save us, and then how fast they're going to save us, it's impossible to forecast. So I will come out with a number of assumptions, predictions that I think are right in the present circumstances, but remembering the turbulence that we're in, so maybe in a year's time it will become obsolete, and in a couple of years' time it will be completely harebrained. So because usually just I'm very self-confident, and because I know if I say that, so in a year's time it will be exactly. But now just I cannot say what's going to happen in half a year. So I see the trend, but I'm not sure because the situation is so deep in the middle of the crisis that then to make assumptions very difficult, and make conclusions even more difficult. So then first assumption that there is a new public agreement number 3, which is taking shape. The second assumption is the new doctrine of Mr. Putin in the international policy, international politics. So that might be of interest to our friends from Armenia, Georgia, Poland, Bulgaria. So this new doctrine, Putin's international policy, Putin's. And then the Poles are always interested in new Russian doctrine, so the same way as it is of interest to Georgians and Bulgarians. So there was a Moscow Times article. So the burden of the empire. This is a new article published. So this is the third point. We'll connect the first and the second. To what extent the new domestic policy and the international policy, when we project ourselves outside, so to what extent it changes the construction of our country, so the way our country is built, and whether we'll survive this new doctrine or not. That's why the title is the burden of the empire. So the new public agreement. So the thesis is very easy. The assumption is easy. You remember this? There's Mr. Dmitriev. You remember him? Do you know Dmitriev? Yes, he spoke here several times. And so he's famous that he predicted mass protests of December 2011. He predicted that. So he was the center of strategic developments, and so somewhere in spring 2011, so they published this report, and they said the middle class is unhappy, no modernization, and if the Duma's elections were falsified, so the people would take to the streets. And so then everyone thought he was crazy, never paid attention, so they falsified those elections 100 times. And why should they all of a sudden just go take to the streets? And then also 200,000 people went to the streets. And then everyone started to think that Mr. Dmitriev is a clairvoyant guru guy. And so I'm being overly critical. So you will criticize me later as well. Yeah, it's being put on the internet. Yeah, being trusted. That's why I'm not as critical as I would like to be critical, because I know that what I'm saying goes to the internet. And as I remember that how this he spoke at Valdysky Club in the 2011, Mr. Dmitriev was a member of Valdysky Club for 10 years. I have been a member, and he was just drawing this beautiful chart. So there was a chart, so the lifespan of authoritarian regimes. So everything goes up and up and up. It means that authoritarian, the leader is very popular, and then there was this flat part, and there's popular, and then there is a nosedive, and so the Dmitriev's, this is a fatal trend which applies to Lukashenko and Putin and Nazarbayev and to everyone, all authoritarian leaders. That was September 2011, but now it's June 2014, and we are still. What do we see? We see that this so something is going wrong. So this Mr. Dmitriev turned out to be wrong. So we're not taking a nosedive. So this euphoria from Crimea, Gutkov, did he speak? Did he tell you about the ratings? And let me remind you that the rating of Mr. Putin is skyrocketing. And so there was this publication a month ago, I saw Levada Center publication, approval on Mr. Putin went up to 83%. And this is the record rating. So last time we had it at only in 2001, 2002, so when there was very quick economic growth. Then there was five-day war with Georgia, helped us, and that turned out another spike. And this is the third spike, 83% approval. And if can you imagine the government of the Russian Federation? Did you imagine the government? Can you visualize the government of the Russian Federation? So you just, so when I say the government of the Russian Federation, you feel confused. You don't have a clear vision of the government. Okay. So, but but the rating is 62. No clear vision of the government, but the rating of approval is 62%. Amazing. A revival. A revival of our party. So the Единая Россия, very popular too. If we held the elections to the State Duma without any falsifications, without any adding of the bulletins, all honest and fair, so it could have hoped for 60% approval. Not true. Levada Center calculated that. Yes, there's the voice of optimist, yes, from the back. So be professionals, be professionals. 30% of what? From all electorate and from those who determine. So calculate, it's 60. So then in May, in Duma, there would be only three parties, DPR and KPRF, Communist and Liberal Democratic. And then the break between the communists and Единая Russia 4 times, four-fold difference. So the May polls revealed that. May polls. So the question is this: So this is Crimea euphoria for several months, and then everything just will go back into the rut, and so the flood will go back into the banks of the river, and it will subside, or we can talk about something, a new qualitative outbreak. I think it's quite possible. My hypothesis, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that a new public agreement is being formed. Number 3, public agreement. So the first one we had in the 90s. So the essence of the first public agreement was that we are living worse and worse. So the factories, inflation closing down, but we're in the middle of Europe, and we're moving towards Europe. And we'll stick it out for several years, like Poland and Lithuania stuck it out for several years, but also having done the reforms, so we'll just join with the West, and we'll live like decent people. So that was the public. So there's a poverty in exchange for European selection and reforms, European choice and reform. Certainly then half of the country certainly did not understand what kind of public agreement was, and so they voted for Mr. Zyuganov, the Communist Party leader. So they want to go back to the Soviet Union. And so half of the people certainly didn't understand the first thing about reforms and public agreement. But when the reforms didn't fly, and there was a debacle. So at the end of the 90s, so I remember this, Mr. Levada was here. So he was sitting right here where you are sitting now, 1999, and he was saying that, so there was a big breakdown of public feelings. And Putin was not there, but so there was certainly a request for one strong man leadership, the vertical power, and the manageability of the state, and so people wanted that. So I remember there was this breakdown in the public relations, also soldiers, and then the guy came who did that, because there was a public request. They wanted one strong man leadership, and so first there was a request for that, the public feeling with that, awareness of that, and then the guy came naturally in the wake of people's feelings. And then the third one until 2 years ago. So the essence was that the power guarantees stability and sustainable economic development. That was the essence of the public agreement, and it takes freedom, rights, democracy, rule of law, many parties, falsified elections introduces, but in exchange we get political stability, political growth, economic stability. The society became the society of consumers. So then 2000 until 2010, it's a happy spree, buying spree. Cars, loans, mortgage, household equipment, trips to Egypt and Turkey, Tunisia, etc. So this is the carefree, so shopping malls everywhere, retail flourishing. So this consumption incarnate. And then starting from 2008, and so then the events with Georgia, this 5-day victorious war, so during the Olympics in Beijing, as you remember. And so then a new request, public request, took shape. Consumption is not sufficient. We want to be great. We want to be the best. We want to be gigantic and great. And all the requests actually reflected this desire of restoration of the old superpower. And all the polls revealed that. In 2012, so how many just bemoaned the destruction of the USSR? 52%. They longed for the old times. They were not. They did not want any profcoms or partcoms and the Central Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They did not want that, because the young people don't even know these words. So do you know what is VCSPS? So that's an acronym. So no one knows. So a couple of guys, they nod, but they don't know what that is. And so they were not longing for the local party committees, the Soviet trade unions, right? So the Soviet, in Soviet times, so all the decisions of the Central Committee of the Communist Party and the Soviet and the Union of Soviet trade unions, so they decided everything. But certainly they don't want just to go back for those things because they hated those things. But yes, but they lost their connection and their unity with the great power. So they don't long for long lines, for shortages of food and products, but they want to be part of a great superpower. And certainly they don't want to. Then the annexation of Crimea, accession of Crimea to Russia. So the feeling of pride, 90% of the population of Russia felt proud. So only 3% were disturbed and scared, 3%, but 0.6% were indignant, and 93% were happy and proud. So this is the response to the accession of Crimea. So let me check your reaction, your response. So many realize that they certainly will have to pay the price for Crimea. So many understand that politically will have to pay, economically will have to pay for that. And so then people will fully realize that even the living standards will go down. But then Levada Center asked this question. So are you personally ready, you out of your own pocket, so give some money to Crimea? Yes, so 47% say yes, we're ready just to help out of our own pocket. But certainly 30% of traitors said no, we're not ready just to pay from our own pocket. But half of the country just are ready to suffer their own well-being just for the accession of Crimea. And then there's somewhat two more figures that bespeak the importance and seriousness, the shift from the consumerist society to the great country idea. So Levada Center asked if they are ready just to support the new territorial acquisitions. Yes, under the slogan of protection the Russians in the former republics. And the people say, why not? Yes, we're ready to protect them. 46% supported the inclusion of Transnistria to Russia. 49% would want Russia to expand at the expense of other territories, so where Russians live. And if you look around, so then there is the city of Narva, for example. Narva, so only Russians live there. They say that there are such places in Latvia and Riga, so lots of Russians living there. Yeah? So this meant lots of compactly living Russians there. Then the northern Kazakhstan, many Russians live there. Pavlodar, Semipalatinsk. So many, so Uсть-Kamenogorsk, Mr. Sinokosov was born there. And so then Chernomyrdiin was saying, if you delve into it, you will see lots of places, lots of territories where there are many Russians living. And so again, 49%, half of the country, so are ready for new territorial expansions. And in April, 60%. So that if the referendum in Donetsk and Lugansk would be positive, we need to take Donetsk and Lugansk too, 60%. So that's why my first assumption, summing it all up, this Crimean euphoria and all these polls, it's the readiness of the people to provide one's own money for the common cause for Crimea and to acquire new territories. All this is very telling. It's telling us that consumerism is not, so economic growth is not sufficient, and consumerism is not sufficient. No, moreover, that there's not much, so there will be no growth much, economic growth. But people are ready to support the power if there is proof that our country is turning into a great superpower. so this feeling of grandeur, and along those lines, so for example, so the parade of the 9 May, May the 9th parade, so was more gaudy and big and impressive. It was presented in that fashion, May the 9th parade. And then the new system of anti-missile defense was deployed around Moscow that would allow to intercept the nuclear strike. And so that was presented in a very meaningful way as well. And at the same time, so then the Eurasian project is inscribed very so because that's the most important project of Mr. Putin, because one of the most important projects of his third term or fourth term is the formation of Eurasian Union, and we expect this year that the three first countries, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Russia, I think Armenians will join this year, and so then to Eurasian Union so will be joined by Armenia and Kyrgyzia. So 5 countries will be there, and the list will continue. And so it's related to the crisis of Ukraine, because which group Ukraine will eventually join? Will it move towards European Union, or it will migrate towards the Eurasian Union?
If I'm right, and if my hypothesis is correct, although I would like to make a reservation again that I'm ready to reject and to give up all my words, in the sense that I do not insist that I'm right. And if this new public concord will mean that we are ready to be poor but great, so it will entail 2 political conclusions. And the first one is that the existing political regime may find more fuel to sustain itself for many years to come. And second, from time to time, the regime will have to demonstrate that grandeur to find some events such as Crimea, Eurasian Union, Super Eurasian Union, new missiles, and one of the projects that you may be proud of in your patriotic heart is that we are going to build a new very heavy ICBM Sedona type. It will be the biggest, the longest, the widest. It will carry 20 warheads, and this single missile can destroy anything you like. That project is very expensive. It will cost multi-billion dollars, and you understand that we don't that big missile at all, because we have very many smaller missiles that can destroy also everything. But if you have to add fuel to that concept of the great power continuously, which is poor but that can destroy everyone, then certainly this big missile is our must. It will be brought once a year across the Red Square, and everybody will be scared of us. And don't laugh. It's a real project. That's a project for the defense complex, and probably it will the missile will be able to orbit Earth 10 times and then hit somebody, you can guess whom. So that's my first assumption. So this new public concord, agreement number 3, that means poverty traded for grandeur. As for the ideological trend that was launched about 2 years ago, Russia is not Europe, conservative values, Europe betrayed their values, and the sacred Russia will carry on its sacred torch. The growth of isolationism, the offshoreization of economy, the growing number of people who cannot leave the country. I don't know if you know that, but about 5 million Russian citizens cannot leave the country now under various reasons. The police, those who didn't pay their debts, somebody who has access to classified information. So contrary to the constitution, some 5 million people, Russian people, cannot leave the country. So that's the cause for isolation, cause for more archaic and traditionalist economy. Well, then comes the Crimea case, and it fits very well into public concord number 3. Poverty for grandeur. So that's my first assumption. My second assumption has to do with foreign policy. And again, it's about a new doctrine. I think you know what doctrine is. There was Truman's doctrine. Harry Truman was the U.S. president, and the doctrine was containment of communism across the world. There was the doctrine of Brezhnev, and the Poles who are present here can remember it too well. That's the doctrine of limited sovereignty. The idea was very simple. It read that if a socialist country tried to get out of the control of the Soviet Union, it would be punished. So it was demonstrated in 1956 in Hungary, in 1968 in Prague, and 1981 it was on the brink of invasion in Poland, and Wojciech Jaruzelski, although addressed the situation, fixed the problem himself. In 1990s, Russia didn't have any clear doctrine. First, we thought that we would join and integrate into the West very quickly, and until 1995, Yeltsin and Chernomyrdin said that Russia had plans to join the European Union and even NATO. Then the bombing of Yugoslavia changed the policy of Russia. Russia stated that West behaved like in the manner we cannot accept, and then Putin came to power. There was a honeymoon with the European Union. He even spoke German in Bundestag, and he said that Russia was Europe, but nothing worked out of that. So, but again, there was no clear doctrine. But now I can dare saying that following the seizure of the Crimea, some new doctrine emerged, and we know about Truman's doctrine, Brezhnev's doctrine, so this is the Putin's doctrine. And I have 7 bullets to explain that doctrine. They are very simple, and I think that our neighbor states should keep that in mind. But again, if I am right, I hope I would be wrong, but suppose I'm right. It reminds me of the words of Mr. Chernomyrdin, who responded to the question of how could we describe the foreign policy. He said that nobody can accuse us of ill will intentions. So doctrine, bullet 1. Vladimir Vladimirovich has clearly articulated it in his famous speech in the Kremlin on March 18th, and he announced the annexation of the Crimea. So bullet 1, total separation with the West. Moscow no longer views the West as the trusted partner. And Putin accused the West of trying to impose their rule on Ukraine and make it a member of NATO and the European Union. He used the word the red line, and you know, the diplomats use that word to indicate something that cannot be done. And he accused the West of continuing the policy of containing Russia, and that belongs to the Truman Doctrine. It's a Cold War policy. And I can quote Mr. Putin. He said that in Ukraine, Russia felt that it had not been just cheated, but it was robbed. And that's the reason the reaction was that acute to the events in Maidan and the escape of Mr. Yanukovych. So the first bullet reads that the West is no longer a partner, and the West does not deserve any trust any longer. Bullet 2, Russia does not view itself as part of the European Atlantic civilization. We have special democracy. Again, I quote, we gave up communist and pseudo-democratic dogmas. Personally, I'm the carrier of those dogmas. It must be a virus that lives in me. Justin, no, he used to have that virus too, but he was cured. Nearly 100% of the Russians support the annexation of the Crimea, so this solution has strong democratic support, and democratically it is legitimate, isn't it? The Marskis is behind me. I should be cautious. So Putin called upon the people to consolidate around new policy, and to become a single organism to reject the fifth column. And the fifth column was said really in his speech. It's not my invention. Conclusion. Every strong country is a civilization in itself and is a model in itself. So the United States is a model, China is a model, and Russia should be a model too. But in fact, that's something that is association with Mr. Huntington, Dr. Huntington ideas of the various civilization, and so Putin assumed that special civilization too, that we are special, and the Eurasian Union is based on that ideology, so meaning that in this territory we have special civilization to be integrated. Bullet 3 of the doctrine. That's the revision of our attitudes towards international law, and the revision is radical. In earlier times, when the West began recognizing the independence of Kosovo, we used to say that it ran counter to the international law, and Kosovo independence cannot be recognized because according to the international law, Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia, and we really blamed the West of recognizing Kosovo. Then we changed our point of view radically and recognized South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Now we changed our point of view even bigger and just acquired the Crimea. From the standpoint of the international law, that's an outstanding violation, and it's an outstanding violation even from the standpoint of the Russian law. I wish you had asked Mr. Voloshin about that last night. You did? Okay. So first, we recognized Ukraine at some point, and the Crimea as the part of Ukraine when the CIS was built following the collapse of the Soviet Union, and all treaties and agreements in the CIS proceed from the premise that the Crimea was part of the Ukraine, and all those documents were signed by Russian presidents, and we recognized Ukraine in the same borders in the framework of the OSCE and UN. What is even worse, we recognized that the Crimea belonged to Ukraine in the big treaty with Ukraine in 1997. I was a legislator at that time. I voted for that. And when I'm asked, what's your attitude towards the annexation of the Crimea, how can I treat that? I voted for the Crimea as part of Ukraine in 1997. And by the way, that treaty has not been dismissed. It's still in effect. And later on, there was the demarcation, and Putin said about that in his Crimean speech. He said that we didn't only sign the treaty and ratify the treaty, we did the demarcation physically. Even the Straits of Kerch was demarked at Tuzla coast, and the agreement was recognized, signed, ratified, but the Crimea seems to be ours. How do you like that? So, bullet 3. And again, we have not withdrawn from that treaty of 1997, and that aroused indignation around the globe as the first case of such a violation, gross violation, since 1947. There was one case when Saar land, small land in Germany, was handed over from German control and French control, but to do that there was a referendum held, and both Germans and French agreed to have that referendum. And besides, the process of the European integration was already in progress, and there was agreement of coal and steel, and both countries were members of NATO, and because the FRRG joined NATO in 1995. And here in our case, just 1 month referendum, and the Crimea is Russian. The world was surprised. So bullet 3 of the new doctrine is that the international law is no longer a system of rules and is no longer even a system of reference points. International law is a menu, and everybody is free to pick whatever he likes. For instance, if one needs to bomb Chechnya on separatist grounds, then we can refer to the right of sovereignty and territorial integrity as the standard of the international law. But if we have to acquire someone's territory, then we refer to the right of nations for self-determination, and both standards are contained in the international law, in the UN conventions. So it's like you walk into a restaurant and take a menu. If you pick territorial integrity, you bomb somebody, and if you need someone's territory, you pick the right for self-determination. So that's how things are in our attitudes towards international law. So strong Russia has every right, while weak Ukraine has no right at all. The world is again a free game between strong players and weaker players. So on the one hand, we go back to the Westphal system of Europe of 17th century, but on the other hand, we revisit the doctrine of Brezhnev, which is the limited sovereignty in the Soviet Union. Okay, bullet 4 of Putin's doctrine. Our sphere of actions in post-Soviet space. Substantiation belongs to the Russian world. It's our historical heritage, and it's in the interests of national security of Russia. Well, sovereignty of post-Soviet countries is limited by the interests of Russia. If Russian interests are respected, the sovereignty of those countries is also respected. But if interests are violated, then the sovereignty is not respected. And Russia determines where red line runs and issue an early warning. By the way, in case of Ukraine, it was done. I attended the Valdai meetings in last September and heard Putin, Ivanov, Lavrov, and they issued a very clear warning, open warning, that should Ukraine sign in Vilnius in November the agreement on association, there would be implications. Although they said nothing about the polite green men, but they openly talked about very strong economic sanctions. So that implies that if Moscow believes that some country jeopardizes its strategic interests in the post-Soviet space, Russia would respond. But in the Crimea, there was a clear transition from words to actions, and Moscow demonstrated that it would not only talk, but it would act. In fact, it happened first in August 2008, in the time of so-called Georgian crisis. Concurrently, Moscow signals to other strong powers such as China and the United States, don't be shy, do the same. We try to exercise control in the post-Soviet space, and you can do that elsewhere. We don't mind, and in fact you are doing exactly like that. United States do it in Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq, and we will do the same. Let's strike a deal. Strong countries can do whatever they like in the zone of their interests. Bullet 5. The main principle of Westphal Agreement of 17th century are modified, and that's the inviolability of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Those guarantees now are given only to strong players who have their armed forces or some umbrella such as NATO or the Collective Treaty Organization. Those who are weaker, well, sorry guys, you are not lucky, you have no guarantees. So it means that the world is divided to the top league and bottom league. Bullet 6. The role of the international institutions is decreased. So UN, OSCE, Council of Europe and others. As you may see, UN is helpless in the Ukrainian crisis. OSCE, what did they do? They sent some observers, but did they stop a single shot? Did they remove a single checkpoint? Did they help to establish a dialogue? Council of Europe, well, they condemned Russia, they expelled the Russian delegation, but it means that the role of the international institutions is decreasing. According to the new doctrine, we can have some collaboration with them, but to the point when they interfere with our interests, and if those international institutions interfere, they just should be ignored, and other strong countries are offered to do the same. And the next bullet of that doctrine is based on the new outlook of the world. In the Cold War, the world was bipolar. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world was a unipolar force about a decade under the domination of the United States. Then I remember that moment when Yeltsin met Jiang Zemin, the then leader of China, who came to Moscow. There was a very pompous summit meeting, Russian-China summit meeting, and then Chairman Jiang Zemin came to the State Duma and made a speech, and he said that we came to agreement with Boris Nikolaevich that since this day the world would be multipolar. Don't laugh. It went exactly like that. So if you look at the long-term trends, then the share, for instance, of the United States in the global economy is shrinking, and the share of the European Union in global economy is also reducing. What is growing? Whose share is growing? It's that of BRICS, and first of all in China. China has already become the second largest economy in the world. India's economy is growing also very fast. Brazil is doing quite well, and Russia's economy used to grow too until recent times. So Putin believes that the balance of forces is changing in the world. But I would like to mention again that EU plus United States makes up some 47% of the global economy. So perhaps their shares are shrinking, but 47% is still pretty much. It's the share of global GDP. So Putin believes that the balance is changing is in favor of new countries, new emerging countries who are not very much democratic. And the share of economy and economic share and the share of influence of the West will be dropping. So the new rules of the game, when strong players rule and international law loses its binding, and the reorientation of Russia towards the East, and it's also based on the hypothesis that the balance of forces is changing, and some rises in the east and sets in the west. You can understand what it means for Russia. And if I'm right again, and if you combine my first assumption about the public concord and my second assumption about the new doctrine, you can roughly understand the ratio, so you can understand where the new resources of inspiration can be found for the people, and how we can continue talking to the West, to the East, and to our neighbors. Are you bored or tired? Then comes my third assumption, and that's the burden of an empire. That's the title for that assumption. Andrei Alexandrovich, okay, I think I leave enough time for Q&A. So, starting from Peter the Great, Russia was what? It has been the empire, right? What do we mean by an empire? Empire is an association, is united people under one umbrella. It's uniting of various diverse elements. Sometimes they are very diverse. For instance, in the Russian Empire, there were Finns and Burats. We have the person here. They don't look very much alike in terms of history, in terms of culture and language, but they all belong to the Russian Empire. And we had Poland in the Russian Empire. Warsaw was a genuine Russian city, as we keep on saying now. So here comes an empire, while conquering of various parts and uniting them under a single center. And it was a wonderful center, very beautiful city, St. Petersburg, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. How is an empire ruled, and what's the difference to rule in an empire and to rule in a democratic and secular state? That's the relationship between top and the bottom. The empire does not allow that ethnic groups that it has conquered. It doesn't allow them to be subjects of the empire. They can be objects of rule, but not the subjects. Some elements of self-governance can be allowed. For instance, in the Tsarist Russia, I liked very much the joke of Richard Pipes, who is the expert of the school, about the mentality, and he used to say that Russia is a sole country which believes that throughout its history it waged only defensive wars, having turned into the biggest country of the world. So when we waged that exclusively defensive war, we acquired Central Asia. The empire was supported by local clans, local khans and shahs. Why should you fight with the people if you can really bribe a khan or a shah? So empire allows for some decentralization or even self-governance, but only within the limits that are allowed. And if the empire feels that it goes beyond those limitations, then those attempts are terminated. It's the chain of report and the command and control over the various elements. It's true that when an empire exists for many years, like the case with the Russian Empire, and existed for 300 years, then there is signs of assimilation, melting pots, and more stable communities arose, like it happened with the Tatar of Volga or Bashkirs of Volga. I came from Altai, and in Altai, in these mountains, we have 3 communities who live in peace, and they are Altai aborigines, Russians, and Kazakhs. But still, Russia used to be an empire. And again, it's always somebody who rules and somebody who obeys, and the relationship between those who rule and those who have to obey. So people are not the subject. People are the object of domination and rule.
The Soviet regime dismantled the hierarchy of the Russian Empire, but was very quick to restore it in a somewhat different format, and having subjugated the same nations, the same peoples on the same territories. This reintroduction of the imperial tradition in the Central Asia, or for that matter, the struggle against the Mensheviks of Georgia and the Sovietization of the Transcaucasia. Some were able to flee. The Finnish, the Poles. Well, of course, how were they able to flee? They had to struggle for their independence, or they were granted their independence. Some couldn't. Some tried, but didn't get too far. It occurred to me that the post-Soviet, the countries on the post-Soviet space may acquire independence, having lost a couple of limbs. They may indeed flee, but they can't flee in their entirety. They would have to suffer losses. I'm not sure if they can run away without a head. That would be something strange, But when you think about Georgia, Georgia is fleeing the orbit, but it has lost 2 of its limbs. The Ukraine is trying to move away from this orbit. Who is from the Ukraine? Yeah, the gentleman from Ukraine. Is he hiding? I'm not sure. All right. I'm not an enemy of Ukraine, as you might have understood from my speech. But in any way, one can run away having lost a limb. The Soviet government restored this model of domination, the rhetoric of the brethren of peoples, and even the form, the political semblance of self-governance in the national republics was also there, but of course the system of domination was the same. The same imperial tradition pervaded and permeated the Soviet history. In the 1990s, the Russian constitution was adopted, which indeed stipulated entirely different things. If you read this constitution that Mr. Krasnov was telling you about yesterday, and this is your constitution, you will see that this constitution describes a country very different from the country where we're living today. While you can see the same list of the subjects of the federation, the same territories, the same components, but it is a different country. So the concept was that there are 3 ways for Russia to exist: an empire, when there is a center which dominates and rules and reigns over a vast territory, with the people being in the parentheses. Number 2 format, a national state, a nation state, something that the Russian nationalists have a dream of, a Russia for the Russians, where there is this ruling or the title ethnicity, which is the elder brother and the others would cope with the rules. Well, I'm not sure why should the other nations cope with the rules installed by the older brother, but at any rate. And the third format is the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation being described in the current Russian constitution, which stipulates the primacy of the citizenry or citizenship over ethnicity, and which indeed describes in great 10-minute detail the democratic procedures which make this country a federative state. It appears that of these three formats, we have opted for number one, which is the empire. When the relations between the government and the regime, between the people and the peoples, and of course in the preamble to the Russian constitution, the very first clause says that we, the multinational people of Russia, which is the first phrase indeed of the preamble, whereby the constitution acknowledges the polyethnic composition of the country. However, a decision was taken, possibly, that this country can only be run as an empire through the relations of subjugation and domination. It might be that the guiding principle here is that unless the imperial principle is installed, the country will fall apart. The Bashkirians, the Yakuts, I'm not talking about the Yakuts, the Yakuts, I wonder how would the polar wars for secession would be fought in Russia and places like Yakutia at -70 centigrade. And in any rate, the model of domination might have been opted for. And on the outside, the control has to be retained over the minions. Let me remind you that in the British Empire, there were two types of colonies. There were the colonies with direct rule from the metropolis, from the crown, when a specific viceroy with the apparatus was sent, and the dominions which existed abiding by the specific rules with London, such as Canada or Australia, for that matter. We have several colonies, de facto territories which are being ruled from Moscow, the South Ossetia or Abkhazia, Crimea, in essence, just a very newly acquired colony, a voluntary colony, Transnistria. There are dominions. I'm not willing to insult anybody, but I am indeed implying by the word dominion a country which is highly and largely dependent on Russia, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and especially nowadays when the Americans are just about to leave Afghanistan, and Belarus. So 4 colonies, 4 dominions. To retain the control over the colonies and the dominions, 2 things are required. Number 1 is a strong army, because you have to, at times, you have to demonstrate your military might. Over the past 6 years, we have done it twice. We've done it in Georgia, and we've done it in Crimea. In Georgia, there were shots fired. In Crimea, thanks be to God, there weren't any shots. And number 2 is that there has to be a lot of money to be spent, something that the Soviet Union was doing for decades. If you remember the Soviet Union, then within this was a very strong, powerful bureaucratic machine. On the outside, it was a military superpower which was subsidizing the so-called socialist states throughout the world, and the socialist bloc. What was the word, really? camp, some sort of camp, a socialist camp, indeed, a bloc. So I went through some papers, and I will report some of the results here. First of all, may I have more coffee, please? Lena Nemirovskaya asked me to stop at that, to allow for some questions. All right, I won't go into deeper into the problem of the burden of an empire, although this is a fascinating subject. So you are left without the burden of the empire. 23 minutes for discussion or questions. If I understood it right, Mr. Ryzhkov has some questions to be asked about the foreign policies of Russia. But the first question will come from Lena. Vladimir, you made a great presentation, but is there a hope, at least for the institutions like civil society, that we may and can with respect to some part of the concerned public, that there are more contemporary, more modern ways of coexistence in the world, and that an empire is an outdated, obsolete type of relationship, and what can be done, because you are indeed lecturing before the students and the grad students. I would like you to think as to how it can be really taken to the attention of the people, that empire is no longer a modern instrument as it might have been at the time of the antiquity. Indeed, I am lecturing at the Higher School of Economics. It is true, I was at the master's dissertations yesterday, and I'm reading, I'm lecturing on the history of the Russian integration, Jean Monnet and the Soviet integration, or the and this is indeed in many ways in harmony with what I'm saying, because the European Union indeed was created by the recent empires. France, Belgium, not many remember what an extensive empire did Belgium have. Great Britain, the greatest empire in the world. So the European integration was in many ways the product of the past empires. At one time, indeed, empire might have been a modern type of state, but of course now I believe that empire is simply no longer sustainable. I was just about to say that, and this burden of an empire is growing. We are increasing greatly the expenses for the army, for the law enforcement agencies, and we are also increasing the financing of the colonies and the dominions. According to my calculations, we're spending about $20 billion per year on the subsidy on the outside, which is about 5% of all federal budget expenses. And I think that this is already a reasonable percentage, which continues to grow. An empire is not just an outdated form, but it is also it also murders the creative potential of the people. Empire, up until a certain time, conceals the conflict, but it does not remove the contradictions. And indeed, the growth of xenophobia is one of the consequences of an empire, because there is no exit or this development. An empire is not just an inefficient instrument, but it is also an unsustainable model which is bound to be destroyed. If we continue to follow the path of a neo-empire, Russia will break up. Let me say this very important statement. No jokes meant. It is a false path. And the burden of an empire is growing in financial, political, social. We are already starting to sink. Zero economic growth is an indicator of that. The taxes are growing. And at the time of an economic crisis, which in my view is only explained by the necessity to pay the imperial bills within the country and outside. So I do hope that we are being heard. I hope that myself, Mr. Kudrin, and others who hold such opinions are heard, and our opinion and voice will be heard. There is a very extensive literature available about the collapse of the authoritarian regimes. It is very unusual for the authoritarian regimes, unfortunately, collapse because of the opposition. Whatever opposition does, whatever opposition thinks, I do not think that the opposition makes them to break up. I think that the most widespread cause of the collapse of the authoritarian regimes are their fatal mistakes, the mistakes that they make. The political mistakes, the economic mistakes, the mistakes in foreign policy. And then when the breakup occurs, under the burden of this fatal mistakes, then some opposition with the banners and the flying colors shouting that we did this and we did that are coming to power. And what I'm seeing today, I do not know if you're feeling this euphoria over Crimea. I'm just trying to look a bit further, and I think that the load of mistakes is growing, and this change of rhetoric on Donetsk and Lugansk, this retreat, this maneuvering, leads us to believe. And already is a sign of getting more conscious, becoming more conscious about the costs to be incurred. The burden of the empire, which is the name of the article I published 2 days ago, is there and cannot be ignored. When a lightweight athlete goes to and try to raise a barbell of 200 kilos, of course everybody might be interested to watch if he can lift this barbell, but of course Russia may afford this largest ballistic missile, or Russia may afford 20 trillion rubles of military expense. I have already looked up in the budget. Do you know what's the percentage of the military? We're number 8 in the world by the accumulated military expenses. It's 4.5%, which is more than the US, which is 2.5 times higher than France and in China, in Great Britain and China. Can we afford this? Can we afford such a military budget, about 5% of the GDP? I'm not sure, but we are carrying this load. How about the expenses for the Ministry of Interior, the police, other law enforcement agencies? The overall. But 1/4 of the budget is spent for the police and law enforcement bodies, and over the past several years, the expenses and costs in absolute numbers diminish for healthcare, culture, sports, and the burden of an empire comes with a cost. It comes with a price. If you want to have an empire, you will have to pay for it. We will have to pay it. We will be paying for it, and we will be paying for it by shrinking the expenses on the schools, on hospitals, on the infrastructure. The economy has stalled. This is what Mr. Kudrin said. And what are we shrinking? What are we decreasing? We're decreasing the investment into the human capital, into our future. This is what the burden of an empire is about. So, Yelena Mikhailovna, I do hope that our voice is heard, because we're just trying to be argumentative in what we say. And I do hope that what can lead to a shift in policy, either a crisis or a conscience of mistakes. Maybe people who are bound to take decision, the decision makers, might hear our voices of reason. Yes, Nina. Thank you very much. Nina Kolipova from the Republic of Komi, Syktyvkar. I've been there. Can we revert to the documents, the ideological variety and the basics of the new cultural policy? One is an already adopted document, and the other is still being discussed. Could you comment on these two contradictory papers? Yes, I agree entirely. I have gone through this document. The one that was that came from the Ministry of Culture, headed by Mr. Medinsky, which is a nightmare. It's a nightmarish document, but this is where you can glean the glorious phrase about Russia not being Europe, and the approach is quite interesting. There are two viewpoints of culture, and this is one of the topics of this school for over the past 20 years. What is culture, and how does it interact with politics and the economy? There are two views of culture. There is the view of a culture as a DNA, as something innate, immanent, something unchanged. The so-called theory of a predetermination on the historical fate that say the Russians have always been slave and will be slaves. I've never agreed with this view of the culture. There's another view of culture, that culture as a complexity of norms and concepts, premises, is and can be changed. I've always professed this second view. I do not exclude the fact that culture may be compared to a loaded train which is following a track. It is true, and I can just joke, talking about the March the 8th, the so-called International Women's Day. The countries in Europe where this this day is celebrated and where it doesn't. And there is also this invisible border as to where, as to the nuptial age or the marriage age in different countries. This interesting invisible border that is like a funny curvature, 30 to 20. But this is what history told. So in the East, women get married earlier than they do in the West. It's a matter of culture, and the people who are vowing that culture is unchanged refer to these deeply rooted cultural traditions. And the second position is that culture can be unchanged, can be changed, and my favorite example of Mongolia that Andrei Zakharov might have heard many times from me. Think of Russia's imperial tradition, Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, but how about Mongolia? How about Genghis Khan and Bati and all the dictators and the despots? However, Mongolia is a country with a democratic system today, with regularly held parliamentary and presidential elections, freedom of speech. It is a self-governed territory, and there's a new president coming to power with every elections in Mongolia. So tell me, do you believe that this... I remember Yanukovych coming to the city of Lviv, and the society was convened at the Opera House, and he said, "I'm glad to welcome the genocide of the Ukrainian people." And he was prompted, no, not the genocide, but the Geno Fund. So think about the Mongols. They're Buddhists. They might have had the tradition coming from Tibet. Now they're free people. But indeed, think about this. Do they have more despoty, more Genghis Khan, or more freedom in their veins? This is an absolute absurd discussion. There is no such thing as intractable or unchanged culture. Culture can and does change throughout centuries. The Germans of the 1930s and the Germans of today are different peoples. They're different. They profess different views. They have different traditions. So the concept of Mr. Medinsky reproduces this absurd about the unchangeability, the unique nature, the specificity of the Russian culture, which has never been this word about the civilization code. I want to exit the room, because why is this done? To support the dictatorship. This is only done to support the despoty, and this is what is being taken to the schools. There's also this concept of the history textbook that has been approved of. The main idea there is that all Tsars were good. All Tsars were good. And all the general secretaries of the Communist Party were good. And the most important thing was to always preserve the state and to increase its territory. Alexander II was a great Tsar because he held the reforms and he expanded the territory. Alexander III stopped the reforms but strengthened Russia. That's good. Ivan the Terrible killed a multitude, but went and got Kazan and Astrakhan. So Stalin, even he killed a host of people, but he still increased the territory. That's good. Even Mr. Sakharov is a good guy, and Solzhenitsyn is a good guy. So how can this coexist? Because they still kept the state apart. They kept the state united. And in the Russian history, there are only three very dubious characters, according to this history textbook concept. Nicholas II. Why did he abdicate? Why did he abdicate? What was he thinking about at the Dno station in Pskov? Why did he abdicate? And if he hadn't abdicated, he would have been a good guy. Number two is Mr. Khrushchev. That's a dubious nature. I don't know why. Probably because he gave away Crimea. That may be why he's so harshly criticized. And I think that this is just the Brezhnev history in a new format. This Brezhnev era historians and Mikhail Gorbachev. Our forefathers had been keeping this empire and expanding it generation after generation, and here he comes and shrinks it. So this is the idea that will be hammered into the heads of the children of Russia, that the greatest value is state, the strength of the state, and the territory. Strength and territory. And those who are strong and they're jolly good fellows, even if they kill. That's not good that they kill, but still, if that's the only way, then so indeed this concept that will be hammered into the children is that of the priority of a state over the society, or and the imperial ideology of domination and the subjugation. So indeed, I am critical of this concept because I think that it leads to and it does not take heed of our traditions. Alexander Arkhangelsky, our colleague and friend, has said that it is not probable that it will ever be accepted.
Dear colleagues, I'm sure many of you would like to hear about the problems of the empire, to have a say, to support Vladimir Alexandrovich, because this is very logical and clear. As always, it's well founded. Probably there are those among you who would like to challenge what Vladimir Alexandrovich has said. Some of you think it's too disturbing, probably. And this word that I keep hearing, rubbish, it's but. Dear colleagues, I know many other words. Yes, yesterday Alexander Stalyevich just absolutely dazzled the audience by using very much the same language. I want to say that you will not be able either to support or object, because time is up. So please, can I just give you as a gift an aphorism by Viktor Stepanovich Chernomyrdin, whom I was very fond of, who very much fits into many subjects. At the session of the government, when he was chairman of the government, he listened to what Vladimir Nemtsov was telling him about the reform of utilities. And as Vladimir Efimовich put it, it was all very simple. He says, okay, look guys, things will be like this. Everybody, just elementarily, in his own manner, he will choose a company that will supply him water, sewage, electricity, repair the elevators, and we will create competition and it will work like a clock. After he finished his presentation, Viktor Stepanovich just says to dear friends, do you have any questions? Everybody is somber and gloomy, and he says, well, those of us who survive will be laughing over it. This sort of epigraph, that's why the word rubbish, we see so much rubbish around us. So, dear colleagues, Vladimir Alexandrovich is our graduate, and for us this is a great pleasure, and we're very pleased. He always speaks at school sessions. Please keep up and try and come again to listen to. Don't keep to detain him right now because he's in a hurry. Thank you.